What if I told you that the greatest battles of antiquity were won not by swords, but by a machine that weighed less than 2 adult men? The Egyptian chariot. We see it in frescoes and movies, but we rarely think about the fact that it was not just a means of transportation, but the pinnacle of military technology of its time. It changed not only the rules of warfare, but also the very structure of Egyptian society, elevating some and crushing others. Watch the video to the end to learn how the unique design of the wheel and one engineering trick that few people talk about allowed Egypt to dominate the Middle East for centuries. What if I told you that everything you believe from watching Hollywood movies is not true? We are often shown heavy Egyptian chariots crashing into dense rows of infantry, scattering soldiers to the sides. It was not designed for a direct ramming attack on the enemy's lines. Any attempt to do so would have resulted in the immediate destruction of its fragile structure. The spears of the infantry would have easily stopped it. It was not a weapon of breakthrough, but a weapon of maneuver and the real strength of the chariot was its role as a mobile platform for archery. It was the fighter of the Bronze Age, not a heavy bomber. Its main task was to circle around the enemy troops, showering them with arrows. The charioteers inflicted damage without coming into direct contact. The design fully reflected this philosophy. The lightest and most flexible types of wood, such as ash, elm, and birch, were used in its construction. The frame was covered with leather or linen, and the floor was woven from straps. This made the platform not only light, but also gave it shock-absorbing properties. The weight of a typical Egyptian war chariot was remarkably low, often not exceeding 30 to 40 kilograms. 1 or 2 people could easily lift it and carry it over an obstacle. This lightness was not a disadvantage, but a key tactical advantage that gave it unmatched. It was this speed that allowed chariots to dominate the battlefield. They could quickly change flanks, pursue a retreating enemy, or evade an attack. The infantry of the time was simply unable to counter such mobility. Understanding this fundamental difference changes our entire view of ancient battles. It was not a battle of brute force, but a complex tactical confrontation. The Egyptians were the first to realize that control over speed and distance was more important than simple mass. They created a weapon that perfectly matched this new doctrine. This concept of a light and fast machine was unique to Egypt. Other peoples, such as the Hittites, built heavier chariots designed for other tasks. But it was the Egyptian model that proved to be the most effective and flexible, allowing them to build an empire. This misconception is largely due to the later Assyrian or Persian chariots, which were indeed heavier. But the golden age of the Egyptian chariot during the New Kingdom is a story of speed and precision. This philosophy permeated every element of its design. We are very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about this image of a light, fast machine compared to the heavy, cinematic version? Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research. Are you ready to learn the truth about where Egypt got this technology in the first place? The secret is that they didn't invent it, but borrowed it from their worst enemies. For a long time, Egypt, protected by deserts and the sea, lived in relative isolation. Its army was based on large masses of infantry armed with spears, axes, and simple bows. Everything changed during a period known as the Second Intermediate Period. A people whom the Egyptians called the Hyksos invaded the Nile Delta from the north. These invaders brought with them 2 things that changed Egyptian history forever: the composite bow and the chariot. This came as a real shock to the Egyptian infantry. The traditional tactics of the Egyptians proved helpless against the mobile archers. The Hyksos chariots raced across the field, shooting at the dense formations of the Egyptians from a safe distance. It was a time of national humiliation, but it also became the catalyst for Egypt's greatest military transformation. The Egyptian pharaohs, pushed south to Thebes, understood a simple truth: to defeat the enemy, you must master their weapons. They began to actively study, copy, and, most importantly, improve chariot technology. Egyptian craftsmen did not simply copy the Hyksos models. They began to experiment. lightening the design and making it more maneuverable. They applied all their accumulated experience in wood and leatherworking to create something new. The war for the liberation of Egypt, led by pharaohs such as Yamos I, was a new type of war. The Egyptians now used hundreds of chariots themselves to oppose the Hyksos. They learned their tactics and turned them against the invaders. After the expulsion of the Hyksos, Egypt changed forever. It entered the New Kingdom era, becoming an aggressive military empire. Pharaohs such as Thutmose III led their armies into Asia, and the chariot became the main instrument of their conquest. Thus, the technology that had brought Egypt one of its heaviest defeats became the basis for its greatest triumph. It was a harsh lesson that showed that military superiority is not eternal. One cannot remain locked in one's traditions, ignoring new challenges. Borrowing was not a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it demonstrated the flexibility and pragmatism of the Egyptian elite. They were able to recognize the revolutionary potential of the new technology and integrate it into their military machine, bringing it to perfection. It was a classic example of how defeat becomes the seed of future victory. But how exactly did the Egyptians turn a borrowed idea into something completely unique? In the next chapter, we will reveal the engineering secrets that made their chariots the best in the world.
Leave them in the dust!
I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the Egyptian craftsmen. What made their chariots invincible was hidden in details that were invisible at first glance. Every part of this machine was the result of precise calculation and a deep understanding of materials. It was the pinnacle of Bronze Age engineering. Let's start with the platform. It had a distinctive D shape and was incredibly light. The frame was made of bent wood and the floor was not solid. A key innovation by the Egyptians was the position of the axle. Unlike other chariots of the time, where the axle was in the center of the platform, Egyptian craftsmen moved it to the very rear edge. This ingenious solution dramatically improved stability. The chariot did not tip over when turning and was much more. The wheels were a true masterpiece. The Egyptians were the first to use 6-spoke wheels on a large scale. Earlier designs had 4 or 8 spokes. 6 spokes proved to be the ideal compromise between strength and weight. The spokes themselves were often not just straight sticks. They had a complex V-shaped or tapered shape. This allowed them to better distribute the load from the rim to the hub. They worked like springs, adding flexibility to the design. The wheel rim was also a high-tech product. It was not carved from a single piece of wood, which would have made it fragile. Instead, it was bent from several thin layers of wood glued together. This lamination technology, similar to modern plywood production, gave the rim incredible strength and elasticity. The outside of the rim was covered with rawhide. This leather was put on the wheel while it was still wet. As it dried, it shrunk, tightening the entire structure like a steel hoop. This not only protected the wood from wear and tear, but also made the entire wheel monolithic and incredibly strong. The drawbar connecting the chariot to the harness was also not a simple beam. It was often made of 2 curved wooden parts joined together. This gave it additional flexibility and resistance to breakage. The design was intended to withstand jerks at full speed. Different types of wood, often imported, were used to make different parts. The Egyptians knew exactly which wood worked best for compression and which for bending. For example, hardwood was needed for the axle and flexible wood for the rim. The entire structure was held together with leather straps and tendons. There were a minimum of metal parts, mainly on the axle and hub. This made the chariot not only light but also flexible. It could deform under load and return to its original shape without breaking. This combination of small but ingenious solutions created a machine that was ahead of its time. Every detail was optimized to achieve one goal: maximum speed and reliability. Like this video if you didn't know about these amazing engineering details.
This chariot combines strength, flexibility, and speed. It is a machine far ahead of its time. Keep the rhythm steady. More pressure on the lathe. We must meet the quota for the Pharaoh.
Guess how long it took to create this?
Sure, the bindings
Answer:
are tight.
less than you think, and all thanks to an industrial approach. These perfect machines were not created by lone craftsmen in small workshops. The Egyptian chariot was the product of the world's first state-run military production system. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom realized that domination required not dozens, but thousands of chariots. This required a completely new approach to logistics and production. These complexes were not just warehouses, but actual factories. Hundreds, if not thousands, of skilled craftsmen worked here. We know this thanks to papyri and paintings in the tombs of the nobles who managed these arsenals. They proudly listed the quantities of products The work was strictly specialized. Some craftsmen were responsible only for making wheels, others for the body, and still others for the drawbar. There were separate workshops for leather workers who made straps and covered the wheels. Such specialization greatly increased the speed and quality of work. The most important consequence of this approach was standardization. Parts made in one workshop had to fit parts from another. A wheel from one chariot could be easily put on another. This seems obvious to us, but for the Bronze Age, it was a revolution. Standardization was of enormous importance on the battlefield. If a chariot lost a wheel in battle, the crew did not have to wait for complicated repairs. The soldiers simply took a spare wheel from the supply cart and continued fighting. This dramatically increased the combat effectiveness of the army. The state completely controlled the supply of raw materials. Precious woods such as Lebanese cedar, ash, and elm were delivered to Egypt by sea. Copper and tin for bronze parts were brought from Sinai and other distant lands. All of this flowed into the royal arsenals. The quality of production was strictly controlled. Scribes and supervisors monitored every stage of production. They kept accurate records of materials and finished products. Defective items were immediately discarded because the lives of elite warriors depended on the quality of. This system allowed Egypt to produce and maintain a huge fleet of chariots in combat readiness. Pharaoh Ramses II boasted that he had up to 5,000 chariots at the Battle of Kadesh. Even if this is an exaggeration, the real figures were still impressive and unattainable for most of Egypt. Thus, Egypt's true advantage lay not only in its ingenious design, but also in its ability to produce it on an industrial scale. They created not just a weapon, but an entire war industry. But who controlled these machines? In the next chapter, we will learn how a new class of elite warriors emerged.
Keep your speed up! Watch that turn, hold the reins tight! Push harder, don't fall behind!
Controlling a war chariot was not a task for a simple foot soldier. It was a complex art that required years of grueling training. Mastering this machine was a long and expensive process. It was only accessible to those who could afford not to work in the fields. Thus, a new class of aristocratic warriors emerged in Egyptian society. We know them by the name Marianu. This term is probably of Semitic origin and means young hero or aristocratic charioteer. They became the new military elite of the New Kingdom. They were the sons of noble families, loyal to the pharaoh himself. Their status in society was extremely high. They were not just soldiers, but the ruler's entourage, his personal guard. Their loyalty was rewarded with generous gifts, land. The pharaohs often took the sons of conquered Syrian and Canaanite princes to Egypt. They were raised at court alongside Egyptian princes. They learned the Egyptian language, culture, and most importantly, the art of chariot driving. It was a cunning move that turned potential enemies into the empire's most loyal servants. The crew of a war chariot consisted of two people, the charioteer and the warrior. Both were highly skilled professionals whose lives depended on each other. Their coordination was the key to success. The charioteer, or driver, was not just a driver. He was a master of tactical maneuvering. He had to control the team of horses, dodge obstacles, and choose the ideal position for shooting. He often did this with one hand, holding a shield in the other to protect himself and his partner. The fighter was an elite warrior, usually an archer. His task was to fire accurately at full speed, in conditions of severe shaking. He had to possess incredible accuracy and composure. He had at his disposal a quiver with dozens of arrows and possibly spears for close combat. The equipment of this elite was the best that the state could provide. They wore expensive bronze-scale armor, which provided good protection without restricting movement. Their helmets and shields were also examples of advanced technology. This combination of two warriors, a charioteer and an archer, working as one, became the core of the New Kingdom's striking force. They were the embodiment of a new mobile warfare. Their training, loyalty, and equipment made them the most formidable force in the entire Middle East. What if I showed you a time machine? That is exactly what the main instrument of the chariot was, the composite bow. It is important to understand that the chariot itself was not a weapon. The weapon was the bow. The chariot was just an ingeniously designed platform that made this bow mobile and deadly. The Egyptian composite bow was as much an engineering marvel as the chariot itself. It came to Egypt with the Hyksos and was quickly improved upon. Its construction was complex and required the highest level of craftsmanship. It consisted of several layers of different materials glued together. The base was a wooden frame. Horn plates were glued to the inner side, which worked under compression. Bundles of tendons were glued to the outer side, which worked under tension. This entire sandwich was glued together with a special adhesive made from fish swim bladders. The process of making and drying such a bow could take more than a year. It was an expensive and very valuable weapon. Thanks to this design, the composite bow accumulated and released a huge amount of energy. Much smaller than a simple wooden bow, it had incomparably greater power. Its range and penetrating power were phenomenal for that time. It was its compact size that made it ideal for use in the confined space of a chariot. A long U-bow would have been useless there. The composite bow allowed the archer to maneuver freely and fire in any direction. The effective firing range of such a bow could reach 200 to 300 meters. This allowed the charioteers to hit enemy infantry while remaining completely safe. Arrows with bronze tips could pierce leather and even some bronze armor of that period. Behind the archer, in a special quiver attached to the body of the chariot, a large supply of ammunition was stored. Dozens of arrows were ready for immediate use. This allowed for intense fire for a long time. This combination of speed provided by the chariot and long-range power provided by the bow was a recipe for victory. The chariot could quickly deliver the archer to an advantageous position. The archer could destroy the enemy without giving them a chance to strike back. The entire tactics of the Egyptian army were built around this combination. Which element do you think was more important, the chariot itself or the bow it carried?
Surround them! Do not let them escape!
As we have already established, Egyptian chariots were not designed for frontal attacks on infantry formations. Their tactics were much more sophisticated and effective. They were based on maneuverability, speed, and psychological pressure. The Egyptians used their chariot corps as a huge mobile swarm. The main task of the chariots was not to destroy, but to disorganize the enemy army. They operated in large but loose formations, numbering hundreds of vehicles. These formations did not attack head-on, but swept along the enemy's front at a safe distance. During these passes, thousands of archers showered the enemy ranks with a cloud of arrows. The infantrymen, standing in tight formation, were ideal targets. They could only cover themselves with shields, unable to strike back at the fast-moving targets. This continuous barrage exerted enormous psychological pressure. It wore down the enemy even before the main battle began. Soldiers suffered casualties, their morale plummeted, and their formation broke down. This was the main objective, to soften up the enemy before the infantry attacked. Chariots often used a maneuver that could be called the Cantabrian Circle, although this term appeared much later. Squadrons of chariots moved in a circle or ellipse in front of the enemy front. This allowed them to maintain continuous fire, as some archers shot while others prepared the next shot. If the enemy formation could not withstand the pressure and broke, the chariots immediately changed tactics. They ceased firing and switched to pursuit mode. At that moment, they became the decisive instrument of victory. No infantrymen could escape from a chariot. They quickly caught up with the fleeing soldiers, scattering them across the field. This prevented any attempt by the enemy to regroup and turn the retreat into a complete rout. It was during the pursuit phase that the heaviest losses were inflicted. Chariots also served as the fire brigade of the battlefield. If Egyptian infantry began to retreat on any section of the front, a detachment of chariots was immediately sent there. They attacked the flank of the advancing enemy, causing confusion and giving their infantry time to restore order. Sometimes a tactical false retreat was used. A small squadron of chariots would feign flight, luring enemy forces, especially their chariots, into an ambush. There, fresh Egyptian squadrons were waiting for them.
Spring the trap! Sons of Egypt, crush the Hittite. Show them the might of Ra.
No story about chariots would be complete without mentioning the Battle of Kadesh. It was a huge battle that took place around 1224 BC. It brought together the two greatest empires of the time, Egypt, led by the young Pharaoh Ramses II, and the Hittite Empire. This battle was perhaps the largest chariot battle in history. According to various estimates, between 5,000 and 6,000 chariots from both sides took part in it. It was a real clash of two different military philosophies, embodied in the design of their war machines. The battle began disastrously for the Egyptians. Ramses II, showing excessive self-confidence and believing false reports from defectors, broke away from his main army. He set up camp with one of his 4 divisions, unaware that the entire Hittite army was hiding behind the city of Kadesh. The Hittites launched a sudden and devastating attack. 2,500 of their chariots crossed the river and attacked the 2nd Egyptian division, which was on the march. The Egyptian ranks were crushed, and the Hittites broke straight into Ramses' camp. This is where the key tactical and technical difference came into play. The Hittite chariots were heavier than the Egyptian ones. Their crew consisted of 3 people, a driver, a spearman, and a shield bearer. They were designed for ramming and close combat. Their tactics were successful in the first attack, breaking through the Egyptian lines. However, once they broke into the camp, the heavy Hittite machines lost their main strength, speed and formation. They got stuck among the tents and carts, and their crews began to lose. At this critical moment, Ramses II showed personal courage. He gathered his personal guard of chariots around him and led a counterattack. The light and maneuverable Egyptian chariots gained the upper hand. They attacked the stuck and disorganized Hittite machines. Egyptian archers shot at the heavy Hittite crews from a safe distance. The Hittites, whose main weapon was the spear, could not. Fortunately for Ramses, his elite reserve units arrived at the battlefield. They struck the Hittites in the flank, and what had begun as a triumph turned into a trap for them. The Hittite chariots were pinned down by the river and suffered heavy losses.
Push them into the water!
The war chariot was much more than just a weapon. In the New Kingdom, it became the main symbol of the Pharaoh's power, status, and divine mission. Owning a chariot was the exclusive prerogative of the elite, and the Pharaoh himself was the chief charioteer of the country. If we look at the art of that period, we see this everywhere. The walls of great temples, such as Karnak or Abu Simbel, are covered with giant reliefs. On them, the Pharaoh, standing in his chariot, single-handedly crushes hordes of enemies. His figure is unnaturally enlarged, emphasizing his superhuman strength. These images were not just a chronicle of events. They were powerful political and religious propaganda. They conveyed a simple idea to the people. The Pharaoh is the divine protector of Egypt. He personally, using the most modern weapons, defeats the forces of chaos and brings order. Owning a chariot and knowing how to drive it became a must for any high-ranking Egyptian. It was like owning a private plane or yacht today. It was a sign of belonging to the highest circle of society, close to the Pharaoh. Archaeological finds underscore the enormous value of these machines. 6 dismantled chariots were found in Tutankhamun's tomb. They were placed there so that the young Pharaoh could use them in the afterlife. These were both ceremonial and possibly military models. These chariots from the tomb demonstrate an incredible level of luxury. They were decorated with gold, semi-precious stones, and intricate inlays. These were not just war machines, but true works of art, emphasizing the divine status of their owner. Chariots were not only used in war or parades, they became the main tool for royal hunting. Hunting lions, wild bulls, or ostriches from a chariot was a favorite pastime of the pharaohs. It was not just entertainment, but another demonstration of valor and control over nature. Hunting scenes were also a popular motif in art. They showed the pharaoh as a master charioteer, capable of striking fast and dangerous prey. It was a peaceful analog of his military exploits, confirming his right to the throne. Like any dominant military technology, the era of the chariot could not last forever. Its dominance on the battlefields of the Bronze Age lasted for several hundred years. However, by the end of the New Kingdom and the beginning of the Iron Age, new challenges began to emerge that ultimately reduced its role to nothing. One of the main factors was a change in infantry tactics. New types of troops appeared, such as the famous Peoples of the Sea, who invaded Egypt during the reign of Ramses III. These warriors fought in dense, well-armed, and disciplined formations, using long spears and large shields. Against such a wall of shields, the tactic of firing from chariots was no longer as effective. The infantry learned to maintain their formation under fire. Moreover, any attempt by a chariot to approach ended in disaster. The new infantry was much more resistant to psychological. At the same time, real cavalry began to develop. People learned to fight effectively while sitting upright on the back of an animal, without a saddle or stirrups. Initially, they were simply reconnaissance riders, but gradually they became full-fledged combat units. Cavalry had a number of undeniable advantages over chariots. A horseman was cheaper to equip than an entire chariot crew. He could move through much more difficult and rugged terrain, through forests, hills, and narrow paths where a chariot was useless. The maneuverability of a single horseman was incomparably higher than that of a chariot. This allowed the cavalry to take on all the tactical roles that had previously been performed by chariots. Horse archers and spearmen became the new elite of the battlefield. In the new armies of the Iron Age, such as the Assyrian army, chariots were still used, but their role had changed. They became heavier, turning into a kind of command post or assault platform, but their time as the main striking force was irrevocably over. In the Persian Empire, scythe chariots were more of a weapon of psychological intimidation, which often proved ineffective against disciplined infantry, as the Greco-Persian War showed. By the time of Alexander the Great, chariots were already completely anachronistic. In Egypt itself, as central authority weakened and Asian possessions were lost, the complex and expensive chariot manufacturing industry fell into decline. The country could no longer afford to maintain a huge fleet of chariots. We can see that the Egyptian chariot was not just a vehicle. It was a complex, integrated system that included advanced engineering, industrial production, a new social elite, and revolutionary tactics. It was the ideal weapon for its time and its theater of war. It transformed Egypt from a relatively isolated river kingdom into the first great empire in history. It was a weapon that truly changed the course of history, proving to the ancient world that speed, technology, and maneuverability could surpass brute force in numbers. What other ancient technologies would you like us to explore? Perhaps you're interested in Roman siege engineering, the secrets of Greek fire, or Viking steel. Suggest topics for future videos you'd like to see in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel